Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Chantel, and in today's video, I'm just gonna get right into it. I do want to do a quick book review. Haven't done an individual book review in a couple of weeks, and I did finish one just the past few days that I really enjoyed, and so I'm going to talk about it. And that is Neil Gaiman's Norse Mythology, that I believe was originally published in 2017. And yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about this book. If you are new here, haven't watched any of my other videos, it would probably behoove you to know that I am a huge Neil Gaiman fan, and have been for many years. This is just one that I had not gotten around to yet, and I recently picked it up on a whim at my local Barnes & Noble. And then when I was talking about it with my best friend, they told me that the audiobook is actually narrated by the author. And so I then immediately checked out the audiobook on Libby and listened to it on audiobook. So yes, this is not like a translation of an existing text. This is a reinterpretation, a retelling of some folk tales, myths from the sort of Norse milieu that Neil Gaiman wrote. So these are not original stories, but they are retellings that he wrote himself. Needless to say, I really loved this book. I gave it 5 wholehearted stars. Neil Gaiman is an author who pretty much never misses with me. The combination of his prose style, his sense of humor, and his overall sensibility, and the kinds of topics that he likes to deal with, pretty much always works for me on some level. And this collection of stories is, I think, particularly well suited to all of those things with Neil Gaiman. You know, it's easy to see, if you know anything about Norse mythology at all, it's not difficult to see why it inspires so many fantasy authors, and particularly Neil Gaiman himself. And I think these retellings, not only are they engaging, entertaining, well-written, and just super fun in terms of, their scope and the characters that they evoke, and the world that they create. Again, this is very, very, these are very, very old stories. This is not a contemporary fantasy novel that does world building as such, but the stories that he tells do convey a sense of world, a sense of place, a sense of this is a culture, this is a people, this is a worldview, a set of beliefs, an understanding of the world that I think is really compelling and interesting. And the variety of stories in this book really go a long way to capturing, I think, a lot of Neil Gaiman's own interests in fiction and literature, obviously. Again, they really range the gamut. You get everything from a story where Thor has to dress up as a woman to attend a wedding banquet as Freya, and Loki comes along for the ride and just turns himself into a woman, to provide sort of color commentary and try to figure out, and try to, in order to get his hammer back, because Mjolnir is stolen, right? So Thor has to get his hammer back, and he has to dress in drag to do it. And it's a very funny story. So there's a lot of that in there, right? But there's also a great sense of scope and epicness, and there's also a sense of constant and impending doom and tragedy, because, as you may or may not know, if you know anything about Norse mythology, is that, one of the biggest things about it is that it has a very specific sort of apocalyptic endpoint with Ragnarok. And Ragnarok sort of hangs over everything, right? And Neil Gaiman does a really good job of seeding little hints of it throughout many of the different stories. And then when you actually get to the Ragnarok story, which is the final story in this collection, you can see how he's sort of tying it all together and being like, this element from this story, and this element from this story, and this element from this story are all sort of coming together in this one big, epic, sort of explosive final battle. And, again, I think Gaiman is just incredibly adept at putting that together and building this world, and building these stories up to this big finale, in a way that I think very few contemporary authors could probably manage. I would say, he, as usual, his character work is excellent. Obviously, I think my favorite stories tend to be the ones where Loki is doing some shenanigans, and the point of which is to say, why are you like this, Loki? Why do you keep doing this? Stop. And Loki, of course, is one of those character archetypes in world literature that is just endlessly compelling, and entertaining to read about. And it's easy to see why he has such a strong influence on contemporary fantasy authors, and particularly on Neil Gaiman, which, again, I think it's again, Neil Gaiman writing his own versions of these stories becomes particularly easy to see why he would be drawn to stories like this. And he talks about it in the introduction to this book. He talks about the ways in which these myths in particular always feel very kind of present in a way that other myths do not for him, and his attempt to make them present for his readers as well. And I think he does a very good job of succeeding in that. So he is sort of, describing a very ancient world and a very ancient worldview that is in many ways very different from our own. Particularly the sense of, the Norse sort of warrior culture, the Viking culture that, birthed this set of stories, and their sense of honor and their social mores and their cultural understandings are in many ways very, very different from ours. But Gaiman does a really great job of making them relevant and making them feel very contemporary and very fresh. And he does that through this, absolutely beautiful prose, and again, just through the weaving of the stories together, and giving a sense of there being a much broader world, a much broader set of stories, of which, these are but a small selection, right? We don't actually have a ton of Norse myths that have survived the centuries. The ones we have are, generally quite incomplete. and obviously they often reference stories that are, you know, lost to the ages. So there, you know, some untold number of these myths are just gone forever. And Gaiman does a really good job, I think, of building this sense of these are just a small selection of stories that, you know, give us a sense of this world, but are certainly not all encompassing of it. So yeah, I think that was, you know, this is a very good book. I will say, to speak specifically to the audiobook version that, as I said, is read, performed by Neil Gaiman, as well as being written by him. It is also very, very good. If you've never heard Neil Gaiman speak, he has a really great voice. Like, just from a purely, like, audio aesthetic tonal sense, like, I just find his voice very enjoyable to listen to in pretty much any context. And that is one big point in his favor. Just the fact that I think he has a lovely speaking voice. And of course, but also he is also a consummate storyteller, right? Like, he has a perfect sense of drama, a perfect sense of timing, of how to pace his words and his sentences, to have the most, to be as effective as possible. You know, and in this sense, I feel like Neil Gaiman would have done just as well in this time period when there were skalds, you know, when storytelling was not written but was oral, because Neil Gaiman is just as good at oral storytelling, at vocalizing, at creating a story with his voice and his words, with his spoken words, as he is at writing them, in a sense. And it was a real it was a real pleasure and a real treat to listen to him tell these stories. They make excellent spoken stories. Like, just in general, myths, for obvious reasons, are very good when spoken aloud by someone who knows how to do that well. As you might imagine, because that's where myths originate from, is oral traditions, oral storytelling traditions. And so, you know, reading them is great and nice, but I think there definitely was an added patina of enjoyment and pleasure at having them told to me by someone who is as adept at storytelling as Neil Gaiman is, and with his absolutely gorgeous voice, which I cannot emphasize enough. He has a wonderful voice. So yeah, basically that was just me wanting to gush a little bit about Neil Gaiman and about these stories. And yeah, the story of Ragnarok, I think, becomes all the more powerful when you have read or listened to the other stories in this collection, and you can put those pieces together, and you can really fully feel the sense of both tragedy and the hopefulness of it, because, as he says in the story itself, Ragnarok is an end, but it is also a new beginning, which is, of course, all the best stories are, right? Like, all of the best stories have an ending, but the ending is always also a new beginning, right? That's just how storytelling works. And so, you know, it really worked for me. It was a 5-star read, sort of 10 out of 10, no notes. Neil Gaiman does it again. If you are at all interested in Gaiman, in Neil Gaiman, in sort of in understanding some of the influences of modern fantasy, the modern fantasy genre, Or if, you know, if you just like a good story well told with lots of shenanigans, there's comedy, there's tragedy, there's a little bit of romance, a little bit of sex, there's some dark stuff, there's some light stuff. It's got a little bit of everything for everybody, and it's just a really thoroughly enjoyable read. And on top of that, I can also heartily recommend the audiobook of this book. So yeah, that is Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. If you have read this book, have any thoughts or opinions on it, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Have you read any other Neil Gaiman books? What are your favorite Neil Gaiman books? I'm always more than happy to talk about Neil Gaiman in any capacity. And, you know, as always, if you want to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and we will see you in the next one. Bye.